Interlude, a master and his apprentice I, RK equals. Time had no meaning in that place. It was a grey, fog-choked realm that constantly shifted and changed. One moment Arya stood on a sun-backed desert, felt the oppressive heat and struggled under the suffocating presence of the dark side that seeped into everything. Then she walked through long, straight metal streets. Cold, efficient lights chased away the darkness, dancing like thousands shimmering stars as the skies tore asunder and tried to drown her with a downpour the likes of which the young clone had never experienced. The place surrounding her shifted again and again. Arya didn't know how many worlds the illusion showed her, though there had to be scores of them. All different. Some pleasant, most not. It took her a lot of tries and errors, stumbling blindly trying to guide the force that didn't want to obey even if it was all around her, until she managed to stabilize the weird realm. Eventually it grew more tangible, the grey colors and mists pulled back, though never went away. Arya found herself walking through a tall corridor made of faded brown metal. The floor below her feet was marred by the scars of battles and scratched by the tracks of heavy machinery. With every step her confidence grew and the surrounding space became more real, less like a dream and more tangible if that made any sense. Arya barely noticed reaching the end of the corridor. She was too preoccupied with trying to force this place to retain its shape and not jump to some other weird location. She was so self-absorbed in her self-imposed task that she didn't notice the bodies until she stumbled over one. It was a humanoid man wearing heavy armor that obscured his features and species. What was plain to see was the cause of death. A lightsaber had burned its way through the chest plate above the heart. The armor bore the scars of a heavy battle, parts of it were cracked, others bore the distinctive signs of a lightsaber that failed to penetrate as well as the telltale melting and ablating caused by blaster bolts. Arya stiffened and looked carefully around. She was in a large warehouse, or so it seemed. At least a platoon laid on the ground, torn apart by blade, blaster and explosive. She was sure she had never seen this place before, and while the armors bore vague resemblance by what the Gar used, the designs looked bulkier, like something you could trust to keep you safe no matter what you faced. Nothing like the joke that was the Phase I and the aborted Phase II armors that got thankfully replaced by the new gear. What was this place? Balmorra. A hidden spaceport used by the Resistance and the Republic to smuggle in people and gear during the Imperial occupation. The voice startled her. "Master," Arya exclaimed and turned around. The Chiss woman stared at the man standing in front of her. Her master looked a few years older than the last time they met face to face and what he wore. She had seen him clad in various types of Republic armor, even Mandalorian one. This, however, he wore dull grey armor with various pieces like the boots and gloves colored so black that they gave the illusion of swallowing the light. An expensive-looking cloak covered his shoulders and its hood was slung back, showing short-cropped graying dark hair. His eyes, which bore into Arya's very soul, shone with the power of the dark side. "What is this? What is happening? We are in one of my memories." The Force could bring them back to life in a way no ordinary human or most known species could recall. Vale waved a hand. "This is Balmorra, the moment when we broke the Resistance and exposed how the Republic infringed on the treaties that ended the war." We could hear the Senate howl, thousands of light years away. Their position shifted and they suddenly were on the other end of the large warehouse, though it was in fact a hangar. The far wall was open to the night outside, showing itself to be little more than two huge sliding doors mounted on ramps wider than Arya was. She could see an old human in blood-red armor similar yet more refined to what the dead soldiers behind them wore. Her master stood in front of the older human and had a crimson lightsaber in color much deeper and richer than any she had ever seen, leveled at him. "I won't surrender, Sith." The old-timer, despite his obvious bone-deep weariness and wounds, the armor might have been in a pristine condition once, but now it was a cracked, broken ruin that leaked blood and hydraulic fluid. The motors driving its exoskeleton components sparkled broken, and wisps of smoke rose from various places upon the man. "You will, General." You will also publicly acknowledge that the Republic broke the treaty by sending you here and supplying your little army. Your gambit to retake Balmorra failed. Your advanced force is either dead or trapped. Your army is about to enter a killing zone and there will be no escape. As we speak, we have 2 sector fleets converging upon your navy in orbit. I am all that stand between your men and annihilation. Vale spoke in an intense yet reasonable tone. Damn you, Vale. The Republic General spat. I want terms. Your people won't be mistreated. We'll handle them according to the Coruscant Accords. Her master smirked. If they surrender now. Otherwise, I will leave them to the mercy of the local garrison. You and your friends made their lives hell for more than 2 decades now. They're hungry for payback. Outside, hundreds of falling stars appeared in the sky. Streaks of light rose to meet them, and one after another they began to blossom in multicolored explosions. The 2 humans stared at each other for long seconds, then the wounded general sagged in surrender. I yield. The old man looked at his wrecked armor. I need a communicator. Vale removed a small device from a compartment on his armored belt and used the force to float it in front of the vanquished enemy. The old human snatched it, pressed a tiny button, and began speaking. The hangar dissolved around them in a grey smoke. Welcome back, apprentice. Welcome to my mind. I've been remiss in my duties as your master. While you're stuck with me, we're about to do something about that. Do you know what lesson I learned that night? When you made that old man surrender? Arya blinked. What do you mean we're in your mind? Don't you remember? Arya shook her head and frowned. What was he talking about? And why did that man call him Vale? Lessons first. I'm not sure how much time I have available right now, though I'll be back as soon as I can. Mercy can have its own deadly edge, keener than any blade. When the enemy knows they will get no quarter, when surrendering is considered worse than dying, they will fight until their last dying breath. They will cost you lives, time, resources. However, when they know they will be treated fairly if they surrender, and that you will destroy them if they don't, many would choose survival. =RK equals Interlude War Logs =RK equals Sergeant Coral Vendor 36th Arinda Regulars. I don't know how the fighting went in other parts of the Republic. It's a big galaxy, you know. Out here, on the rim in the galactic east? It was hell. We lost words, retook them only to lose them again the next week. Sometimes the same day even. Let me tell you about my personal piece of purgatory. Once upon a time, before the Seppies and their tin cans came knocking, it might have been a beautiful city. The first time I ended up there, after the initial shock of the war and opening Seppi offensives petered off and the Gar counter-attacked, Atar was still somewhat attack. IT hadn't been subjected to 5 rounds of brutal street fighting yet. When we got kicked off from that rock for the last time, that city was little more than bombed and ground to gravel rubble, but then, when we retook it for the first time, no one knew how bad things were going to get. We were on the top of the world. We were Republic soldiers, full with pride, angry as all hell, and most importantly, we all knew in our bones that the greatest superpower that the galaxy had ever seen had our backs. Just a few short years later we all knew better, damn the Jedi and those never sufficiently cursed Seppies. You were about to tell us about your experiences on Jan Farthel, Sergeant Vendor. I'm rambling a bit again, ain't I? Just a bit. It's no issue. I have the time. That was the one commodity the Republic ran out of. Do you know that if the Seppies unleashed their grand offensive just a few months later, if the Jedi delayed their coup? If. The old soldier sighed. When Corellia fell and the Republic with it, we were so close to evening the odds. If that first major round of new naval construction was completed as planned, the galaxy would be a different place today. That, the Jedi treason and Chancellor Palpatine's assassination broke something into the Republic. We felt the effects almost immediately. Command and control got disrupted with clone units going after any and all Jedi in the vicinity. The promised reinforcements the Navy depended on to stabilize and hold the line in space wouldn't come. We had to fall back again and again. Units got broken up to bring others up to strength, and command threw us into the breach again and again in a desperate bid to keep any more vital industry from falling into enemy hands. From almost everyone I've interviewed so far, there's a pattern emerging. Despite lost ground in the initial stages of the separatist grand offensive, many in GAR, no matter if Navy or troopers alike, knew that those setbacks were temporarily. You only had to hold on for a few more months, and then new construction along with newly raised army groups meant to augment local forces and the clone armies were supposed to turn the tide. We could almost taste it, victory. When General Vale became Supreme Commander of all combat forces, he shook up things. Command, when at all possible, put preserving our lives as a top priority, right behind achieving the objective. It wasn't like when some wet behind the ears green boys and girls gave the orders, or worse, certain Jedi. We knew for a fact that if we were going to die in battle from that moment on, it would be because that was the best way to get the job done. When politics got in the way after Geonosis, General Kenobi did a fine job as well. Things were getting better. We got a constant stream of reinforcements, upgraded ships, new weapons and armor. There were rumors about new vehicles too being in development. All we had to do was buy enough time and the tide would soon turn. Then the coup happened. The issues deadlocking the Senate for a month. Don't remind me about those pampered core pansies. How many of them gleefully abandoned us to fight and die alone and unsupported? How many of them caused trouble and forced command to divert ships and troops to watch them instead of reinforcing the front lines? That's how Arinda fell. Our small defense fleet had a single cruiser battle group from the GAR in support when the separatists hit. Do you know where the rest of their fleet was? In the core, keeping a close eye upon traitors. Now that you've calmed down, Sergeant, let us get back to your experiences on the Eastern Front. Your record is extensive. You saw your first deployment just 6 months after the war began, and by the time the battle for Mandalore happened, you had seen action upon 11 worlds, many times on the same ones multiple times. Where should I start? How I was a dumb kid when we retook Atar the first time? How rotten I felt when it turned out we simply couldn't hold the planet, much less the capital, and had to pull off? The worst was how the locals looked at us, no matter if we were clones or regular folks. They were stunned that the Republic couldn't protect them. Many disbelieved that we had to really retreat and abandon their world under Seppi control. We came back, of course, again and again. By the time we lost control of that world for the last time, there were no civvies left in the capital. In fact, there were none I saw, besides as corpses, during that last campaign. Just wave after wave of steel, ordnance and blaster fire. When we retreated that time, the fleet gutted what used to be Atar from orbit and a clanker army with it. And there was no one left to care. After that came Arinda. I was on the last transport off Jan Farthel. I was on the last one that successfully left Arinda after Command attempted to salvage whatever it could before pulling out and consolidating all the way back to Ord Mantell. We gave the clankers one hell of a fight, yet my home was a burning ruin when my unit got ordered to retreat. A week later, we became one of the so-called Ghost Brigades, units on secondment to GAR from worlds fallen to the Confed bastards. While we didn't hurt for equipment, there were issues with replacements. By then it was known far and wide that Camino was gone. Most new recruits sent our way went to the units from their own worlds, and in the core, those still loyal either had to watch their neighbors, were busy training new units of their own, or they were tapped for the expected offensive to retake Corellia. To put it bluntly, the 36th was left to die on the vine. Once we suffered enough casualties to be no longer combat effective, we would be broken to reinforce other units, but that's not why you're here. Not really. Mandalore. You want to know what happened there, don't you? From someone who was on the ground and met the general, right? Well, that too, however I didn't lie. I'll hear first about how you get there. From the start. I have about a week here, just a handful more veterans to interview besides yourself. Fine. The sergeant closed his eyes. Something more memorable than just another firefight at a street that has been a glassed crater for more than 2 decades now. I think I know just the thing. Do you know how we retook Atar the third time? We made an orbital drop, a whole division worth of people, right in the middle of the city to capture and neutralize vital enemy positions. It was glorious, or so I thought as a much younger fire eater. Nowadays, I know better. Or it just might be my bad knee. The Long Road to Mandalore =RK equals Part 7 =RK equals Gar HQ Coruscant. For General Talar Valentra, it was just another day in the office in the post-coup galaxy. Everyone and their cousin Trice removed, who wasn't even of the same species, cried, begged or demanded more supplies, ships and bodies to throw at the separatists. The damned thing was that the Republic, or what passed for it these days, actually did have ships to spare. It was just that many of them were bound in the core watching less than reliable systems that just a few weeks ago were supposedly loyal Republic members. Others were tapped for Operation Citadel, the planned liberation of Corellia. Of course, there was a significantly diminished strategic reserve left, but that wasn't something Talar was going to tap into unless a great opportunity presented itself or yet another disaster struck. When he got to his office, after the 6th long night that week, he found one of his aides waiting with briefing on the situation at the front, another with a pile of encrypted data pads and stacks with data chips containing reports he actually had to read, and a third one with requests from commanders he couldn't push to a subordinate to deal with. It was days like these he wished to be out on the front where things were somewhat simpler if more hazardous to one's health. Let's start with what I actually need to know. Valentra addressed his senior aide, a youngish captain who generally had even longer nights and was always at his job half an hour earlier than him. Nevertheless, he looked fresh and chipper, as if he had 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep during the last moth. That weren't mandated by the medical personnel anyway. The separatists launched another series of raids last night. As of 15 minutes ago, we've got them contained. Shipping losses, however, are about 7% above what we expected. Captain Carlson dutifully reported. He sounded refreshed too, the lucky bastard. Did his aide found out some new kind of stimulant, or it was perhaps his youth? 15 years might not sound like much, but still. Did we lose anything of note? Some munitions and fuel shipments, mostly it was freighters hauling raw resources or refined metals. Make a note, I'll speak with Kenobi about assigning more escorts and hunter-killer groups to fend off that threat. A few percent might not sound like much, though it's still a huge number of resources in absolute terms. Those ships need to be replaced too, crews trained, not to mention the knockdown effect each lost one has on our industry and logistic. Talar grumbled. He waved the human captain to continue. Next, there was another raid on Geyser, presumably to further weaken the system and pave the way to Tanab. Rear Admiral Alona used his newly completed interdictors to trap and destroy the separatist force. While his fleet suffered moderate damage and lost 2 of the 3 interdictors, the separatist fleet was decimated. Only about 30% of it managed to flee to hyperspace, and many of those ships were damaged. Considering the last no enemy strength at Lantilles, he declined to pursue and instead pulled back to Naval Station Citadel for repairs. In a few days, he'll be sending a few more captured ships behind the front so we can sweep them for any unwanted surprises before recommissioning them. Good for him. Numbers, classes. Valentra would have to make sure the supplies and specialists needed to refit those ships were dispatched with all haste. Unfortunately, the job did require some custom-built equipment, not to mention slicers, naval engineers and security teams to check every nook and cranny of the enemy ships for hiding droids. 1 heavily damaged battleship and 3 frigates. There were a few more prizes, though those were in a bad way and will be broken up for parts and material at Geyser. We'll put those to good use. Anything else of note from that corner? Just the usual requests. Noel here has them. Carson nodded at the youngest aide, a young Twi'lek lieutenant. She looked like she just came out of the academy yesterday, though she had the benefit of completing the one at Anaxis a few weeks before the war began. There hasn't been any major disasters or notable victories in that sector we've heard about. With the holonet disrupted. The human shrugged. I do have a list of lost and captured planets as well as systems in that quadrant. He tapped one of the datapads he held with a finger. The strategic situation remains a stalemate. A very bloody one. Same old mess. Valentra nodded. It had been that way in the eastern part of the galaxy ever since the enemy offensive ran out of steam, a grinding exercise to produce casualties and erase material spread over tens of thousands of light years. I would have learned if there were any other developments of note on the core front. Someone would have awoken him for sure if that was the case. Most likely one of his 3 overworked aides. Reliable news from the rest of the galaxy? The usual assortment of rumors, smuggler-generated hightails and separatist propaganda. You know better than us that what little we get from Republic intelligence sources is suspect at best, outright fabrication and misinformation at worst. The captain grimaced. I should remind you that General Kenobi will be busy this morning. He's meeting a Jedi general who surrendered when Chancellor Palpatine issued Order 66. She got shipped from the front earlier this morning, so you might have to cover for him if something crops up. You're his acting exoplanet side. Dully noted. He's taking precautions, right? I certainly hope so, sir. Let's get to it then. RK equals Detention Center, GAR HQ, Coruscant. As far as cells went, those nested deep beneath the GAR's nerve center were rather good. Certainly they beat the locked shack Ayla Secura was kept for a period of time before she could be shipped back behind the immediate front. After that her accommodations were decent, certainly nothing someone raised in the Jedi Temple would find too Spartan. What got her was the time she had to think after Order 66 came and she surrendered. Think and meditate. The Force, however, held no good answers. All the Jedi could perceive was the encompassing, smug darkness shrouding the future. It was at the same time oppressive and alluring, holding promises for answers. Even now, many weeks after the galaxy went mad, Ayla was no closer to figuring out what happened. If it wasn't for what few of her soldiers, like Blue, let slip, intentionally, she was sure, the Jedi attempted a coup, managed to kill Chancellor Palpatine, and then all hell broke loose. She felt many Jedi dying, the death cries of Kamino and Bothoi, the dark side growing even stronger, yet she persevered. Her clone guard had been still, though professional, almost cordial. They were the reason for the delay before she was shipped to Coruscant in the first place, apparently finding enough clones who could both take her down if she tried to escape, yet didn't even think of arranging some kind of accident, had been hard after Order 66. Still, there was a reason why she bid her time and acted as a good little prisoner. The current Supreme Commander of the GAR was a friend. Ayla was here to meet him and get answers. If there was one thing she was sure of in this crazy galaxy was that Obi-Wan Kenobi of all people wouldn't have succumbed to the dark side. Right? Her heart was convinced of that, which wasn't very Jedi-like. Her mind, on the other hand. Secura had her doubts, though she rarely admitted them even to herself. Still, what she sensed when she arrived in the pre-dawn hours, well, it wasn't what she would have imagined a world under the sway of the Sith to be, and that was the only somewhat sensible reason for the Council to go for a coup. If you squinted hard enough anyway. While Ayla could still feel the disruption in the Force caused by a lot of Jedi dying at the Temple, Coruscant itself didn't feel much different, at least as far as the dark side was concerned. There was nervous energy in the air, literally. Billions upon billions of scared and anxious people cramped on a single world, that left an impression in the Force and was so unlike Coruscant before the war. Ayla's breath hitched when she felt a strong Force presence approaching. Relief and elation was what she felt when she sensed that Obi-Wan was coming. He didn't hide himself, and what she could perceive from him at a distance, well, he was no Sith. By the time her cell's door opened and the force field further securing the only entrance shut down, Secura had herself under proper control. Obi-Wan. Still, her relief was plain to see and hear in her greeting. Ayla, it's good to see another Jedi made it through this insanity. He flashed her a brief tired smile before shaking himself and assuming a rigid posture. While I don't believe you had anything to do with the Council's folly, I'm compelled to investigate. Kenobi grimaced. What insanity got into them anyway? Ayla couldn't help herself. That question had been nagging her for weeks now. So many people died because that singe act of sheer insanity. My best guess? Fear. If the circumstances were different, I would find the situation highly ironic instead of tragic. And it wasn't just the Jedi, especially the Council, who let their fears control them. I saw the same happening with the Senate and many local governments. But let's get back to the inevitable. I have to ask you, did you have anything to do with the Jedi coup? Did you have any prior knowledge about it? Obi-Wan looked her in the eyes, and Sakura could sense him concentrating upon her through the Force, not merely relying on his physical senses nor any monitoring equipment built into the cell. No. It all came as a shock. Ayla gladly admitted. This time it was Obi-Wan's turn to feel relief. Good. I can sense no deception. His posture relaxed a bit. I only wish that my word would be good enough to clear you, however you're for at least a few long questioning sessions with military intelligence and the other services investigating the coup. Obi-Wan, what happened? The first I knew something was wrong came from a disturbance through the Force, then Commander Blue along with the rest of my soldiers turned their blasters on me. He told me I had Vale of all people to thank for altering Order 66 from kill on sight to capture unless we resisted. Obi-Wan grimaced. He had spoken with Valentra among many other people about this whole mess, and it came as a shock that it was Talar and Delkatar who altered that particular contingency order. Its very existence hinted that the Council might have known even more than he suspected today, yet. If Vale was really an enemy of the Jedi, why would he do that? On the other hand, what he has been up to in the Rim. I really shouldn't be telling you much, anything really. Not before the investigation in your potential involvement is over. You're the Supreme Commander of the military. Ayla pointed out. I'm also a former Jedi, a Mandalorian too, and Delkatar Vale, perhaps both the most hated and respected man alive in the galaxy today, is both my brother-in-law and, more importantly, technically my head of state. People see nepotism and political statements in everything I do these days. Obi-Wan confided, Bothoi. It was him, wasn't it? I've heard just the odd whispers from my guards, but what I felt. That gets complicated. By all rights, I should have his head for what he did there, no matter his justification. Kenobi looked torn. It should be that simple. Why it isn't? Just before he showed us all what truly means to be a Sith, the Bothan's Council declared for the Separatists. They had his fleet trapped above their homeworld when he did whatever he did and murdered everyone on the planet and the enemy ships in orbit. It happened live for all the galaxy to see. Channeling that much energy, it burned him from within even as he used it to heal himself. When the transmission cut with his fleet fleeing before the Separatist ships could intercept it, it was little left of him but charred meat. For all we know, he's dead. With that one act and his words right before it, Vale cemented himself as someone at least half the galaxy loathes and fears like no one before. The Mandalorians, many of our soldiers, even certain planetary leaders both respect the lengths he went to, the power he wields, and the latter group praise that he is dead and would stay dead while often publicly support him. I can understand the fear and hatred. The Mandalorians at least, their respect, but the rest? You make it sound like he has a somewhat broad public support across the Republic. Ayla was confused. It's simply really. Obi-Wan grimaced. At Geonosis, Sullust and now Bothoi, Vale made the Separatists bleed. Up until now, most of the systems where the war was fought were loyal Republic ones. What would you do if he is indeed alive? Sakura asked. It was such an innocent question, really. Many would cry for his head. Others will want him in charge of the war, or at least in reserve as our pet monster we can threaten the Separatist with if they try to pull off another Naboo or any of their usual war crimes. That's what other people would do or want done. What about you, Obi-Wan? Honestly? I don't know. It should be simple, but it isn't. Do you know the worst thing? Technically, legally he had the authority to deal with Bothoi as he saw fit once the Bothans turned their coats. Obi-Wan. That doesn't make it right. Certainly not. Kenobi sounded offended at Ayla believing that he would think such a thing. However, that leaves any attack at him as primary politically motivated. He destroys worlds. I know. Obi-Wan admitted. For the last few months I had to live with the idea that one of those days, unless we lose the war, I would be the one giving orders to reduce enemy worlds. For the best of reasons, of course: critical industrial targets, orbital strikes to make ground force casualties sustainable, because a long time ago we went way past what anyone sane would call acceptable. Obi-Wan, what happened to you? Sakura examined him more closely, both with her eyes and through the Force. She couldn't really feel the dark side upon him, however the light was dimmed too. He felt grayish. If that made any sense. Ever since becoming the Supreme Commander, for at least few months before that really, I began to understand how Vale might have become who he is today. These calls we have to make as military officers, now everything that rests upon my shoulders. Ayla, every day I'm sending billions of soldiers to die all over the galaxy. Because of my orders, whole worlds, both ours and theirs, are being turned into rubble as we speak. What Vale did at Bothoi is reprehensible, I have no doubt in my mind nor my heart about it. However, tomorrow, next week, a month or two from now, I might very well be the one giving orders that would result in something similar, if not execution then result. By the Force, military speaking, what he did might have been the best decision available. Do you know what's the worst thing? For all the trouble it causes, there had been some benefits and we had to use them for all they were worth it. Sakura stared speechless at Obi-Wan. She wondered if she ever truly knew him, and if that was the case, what changed him into the stranger venting his frustration at her.